Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. According to former counterterrorism chief Joe Kent, Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States. That statement was a part of his resignation letter that he submitted to the president, leaving his position as director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He went on to say that it was clear that the United States started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful lobby here in this country. Now, I would say none of this comes as any surprise to anyone who was really paying attention, as this is something many who oppose the conflict in Iran have been saying since the beginning. The pretenses for bombing Iran, proposed by the administration, rang as hollow as those put forward to justify the war in Iraq 20 years ago by the George W. Bush administration, which is to say they sound good on their face, but with any sort of scrutiny, they fall apart almost immediately. When it came to understanding the inner workings of the military, Joe Kent certainly was qualified. This is a man who was a former Green Beret in the Army and a CIA paramilitary officer with 11 combat deployments. This is a man who knows the armed forces and knows a lot about when military action is or isn't justified. So if he felt that it wasn't, he's someone whose insight should be trusted and given a great deal of credence. Doubly so because he's speaking out against the party line despite being a very loyal Trump man. This is a man who ran for Congress twice with President Trump's backing, and in his resignation letter he even praised President Trump's foreign policies during his first term. And given the president's habit of only placing his most loyal people in high positions, the fact that he made it up to the director of the National Counterterrorism Center shows that his loyalty was never in question. So for him to call the conflict in Iran a war that serves no benefit to the American people nor justified the cost of American lives, at a time when the administration insists that it is in fact both of those things, to me really speaks volume, and the fact that it is clear he is losing even some of his most loyal supporters within his own administration really shows just how disastrous this conflict is being for the president and the administration as a whole. In his resignation letter, former Director Kent points to high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deploying a misinformation campaign that not only undermined the president's so-called America First platform, but sowed pro-war sentiment that encouraged war with Iran. He called it an echo chamber that was used to deceive the president into believing that Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States, and that he had to strike immediately, that there was a clear path to swift victory, and says that was a lie. You can say, of course it was a lie. You'd have to be pretty ignorant of just about anything about the history of that region to think there was any sort of quick victory possible in the region once the military conflict began. There are never quick ends to conflicts in the Middle East. The part that intrigued me about that statement, though, was not the fact that he points out that it was a complete and obvious deception by Israelis and the American media, but more the fact that he fingered Israelis at all. Many of those pro-war on the right like to downplay the involvement of Israel in this conflict and feeling that it was all about protecting America and it was about the president's decisive action to protect the nation against the imminent threat posed by Iran. Acknowledging just how integral Israel was in the impetus for beginning military conflict by the Americans in that region completely undermines the notion that President Trump was a strong, decisive leader who took these actions all on his own, but does bolster the notion that he is both easily misled and that he is deeply controlled by the Israeli government. Attacking Iran may have been sold as an America First, all about America's protection military action. With almost even just a little bit of scrutiny, it's easy to see that this conflict is more about protecting Israel than protecting America. And the president was just being used as a useful tool in that endeavor. And if there's one thing the president absolutely despises, it's even the notion that he is anyone's puppet, be it corporations or foreign governments. So I can only imagine the implication here is not going to make him very happy. But I think other than being in complete denial, that shoe certainly fits. The conflict in Iran is absolutely Israel's fight to wage, but they are using American lives to fight it, and the president is willing to go along with it because he believes, I suppose, that this was a great idea and not something he was manipulated into getting into with no idea how to get out of it. But as the conflict continues and the loss of American lives continues to increase, it becomes increasingly difficult not to see it that way. The conflict in Iran has been bad for America, both abroad and domestically, but the president steadfastly does not want to acknowledge that nor take any sort of responsibility for that. His massive ego making it impossible for him to admit that he got the country involved in somebody else's war. But it's Americans who are paying the price for it. In his resignation letter, former Director Kent urges the president to reflect upon what we're doing in Iran and who we're doing it for. If this were virtually any other president, really any other world leader, this might actually have some sort of effect. It may actually cause them to be introspective and think about possibly just how disastrous the decision to go into Iran and begin armed conflict was, and how maybe it was not the right decision after all. But if there's one thing this president does not do, it's reflect on the efficacy and efficacy of his decisions. And if there's two things he doesn't do, it's also admit when he's made a mistake and he made a decision that was the wrong decision. So that plea for reflection is likely to fall entirely on deaf ears. Former Director Kent begs the president to consider reversing course and charting a new path, instead of simply allowing us to slip further towards decline and chaos, as he calls it. But I think, as he well knows, the president does not do reverse course, because reversing course would mean admitting that the original course was mistaken, and he does not do admissions of mistake. But as an 11-time combat veteran, former Director Kent knows the horrors of war, not only from his numerous personal experiences with combat, but also because he lost his wife, who herself was a Navy intelligence officer, in an ISIS bombing less than a decade ago. He knows firsthand the futility of these sorts of conflicts and the personal losses they can result in. So if he is saying this is the wrong way, the president should take heed. But sadly, I know for an almost absolute fact he will not. And I think former Director Kent knows that, which is why he's jumping ship now, because he can see, if things continue, where they may go, and the tragedies we may all be looking forward to in the near future as a result. Being against the conflict in Iran as someone who has never had to fight in combat isn't that hard. You can object to it on a moral level, on a financial level, on a just human level. But in some ways, I think you're doing so at an abstract level. You understand the concepts of why the conflict is wrong. But I think when it comes from someone who has known the horrors of war, who have been in combat, who have suffered losses as a result, there's such an added weight and substance to that objection that can't be captured by anyone who has not experienced it. But of course, I acknowledge that that is coming from someone who has thankfully never had to go and fight in a foreign land and kill and possibly be killed simply because my government told me to. I come to the topic from a place of privilege and safety that men like former Director Kent was never able to experience. But because I was able to, I also feel that when someone who has had to experience the absolute butcheries of war and lost people they loved to those wars, they should probably be listened to. When someone like that comes out against these sorts of conflicts and pushes back against decisions to enter them, they do so from experience. They do so knowing the cost and saying it is not worth it because they've been there, they've experienced it, and the president ignores those types of voices at his own peril and the country's. I have no doubt former Director Kent will be branded a traitor by the president and his supporters for daring to go against his decision to fight in Iran. In Trump world, disloyalty is one of the greatest of sins, one so egregious that if the insurrectionists from the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol building are to be believed, is one punishable by death itself. And while I highly doubt the president is going to call for former Director Kent's execution as a result of this resignation and the claims made in his resignation letter, I do feel he and many of his supporters will be perfectly willing to entirely write off him and what he had to say, because to listen to him would imply a level of introspection and accountability that entirely eludes them. I don't think the resignation of a Trump loyalist, even one that is a combat veteran, is going to make much of a dent in either the perceptions or attitudes to the conflict in Iran by those on the right, and certainly isn't going to sway the administration from the path that they have gone down. But those kinds of feelings coming from someone like former Director Kent should be listened to, not summarily ignored. If someone like him with his experience is having reservations, I think that should give them pause, really make them wonder if maybe he just might be right and know what he's talking about. But sadly, I know it won't, and we're all going to pay the price. That really is just awful. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.